I got so tired of seeing things like this, and this, and this, that I made a huge sacrifice and became a traditional shingle maker. My name is William Burney, and I've been doing historic restoration work for almost 20 years, and it's been a constant battle. Bad materials have been destroying historic buildings for generations, but we can all do our parts in turning things around. One small thing I'm doing is making the best wood shingles possible. Get up! Get out of the way! Manufacturing shingles for me begins here at the log yard. I've worked out a deal with a couple of Amish sawmills to set aside their better logs for me. I check them over for signs of damage, knots, and other defects, but it's always a gamble. Sometimes I pay $100 or $150 for what should be a perfect log, but find it riddled with wormholes. Obviously, shingles with holes are pretty well useless. My policy, developed over the past 15 years, is to avoid any log that has the bark coming off. Fresh green logs are always the best bet. The butt cut of a log is always the best for shingles. The higher into the tree you go, the more branches you'll encounter, and the knots become worse. It really does become a mess. The bark can tell me a lot about the quality of a log. It tells me how straight the grain is, and if it has too much twist, I can turn it down. I cut the timber into blocks. I generally make my shingles 18 inches long, but I cut my blocks to 20 inches. That extra 2 inches really does come in handy. I split the blocks into quarters to make them easier to handle and load them on the truck. Farmers would use timber from their own land, and they'd spend some time in the winter making shingles for themselves. I believe that many of these farmer shingles, as I call them, would make their way onto the open market. Man, this center looks bad. Another couple years and this tree would have been gone. The mills I deal with are about an hour from home. When you try to buy timber directly from people, they tend to overvalue it. Every log is a veneer log to some people, and it's just not worth the headache. So I take a pleasant drive down country, sometimes with my Uncle Dave, and get what I need for a fair price. I have to get to work on these blocks within a week or two of getting them home. If I don't, they're going to dry out, and it'll be absolutely miserable trying to split them. I split the quarters down until I have what are called bolts. These are blocks of wood that can be split into individual shingles, each one making between 3 and 6 shingles. When it's convenient, I split off the pith. This is the wood at the center of the tree that is usually harder to work, wavy, and really it's best used for charcoal or firewood. Take this little section here. For this, I can generally use a throw or a wedge. On a timber, you have the gross rings. Running perpendicular to them, going from the center to the outside like the spokes in a wheel, you have these ray lines. For the best possible shingle, I split each shingle along this ray line. And this is where the real skill comes in. Taking off the first shingle from the bolt is generally very easy. I drive the throw down with a wooden club until it's all the way into the wood. I pull on the handle and the shingle generally pops right off. But sometimes it requires a bit more effort. Once the blade's all the way down in there, I like to spin it around and put my knee against the block and pull back on the handle. I generally get the best results by spinning the block so the bolt is between me and the new shingle, and then pull on the handle with an even pressure. almost perfect shingle. It's thicker down here at the butt end, tapers down to about 1/4 inch on this end, to about 1/2 inch here. Once it's shaved and trimmed, she'll be ready to go. The perfect shingle should be 3/8 of an inch thick when it's dry. I aim for between 1/2 inch and 5/8 when I split out a shingle. Usually this first shingle comes off with an almost perfect taper. There were quite a few laws regulating shingle quality in the early 19th century, and they were inspected prior to being exported. I use these same regulations in making my own shingles. The second shingle is a bit more complex. I flip the bolt over and start the shingle from the opposite end. Historically, before the advent of machine-made shingles in the first half of the 19th century, split shingles were the only real option. It's a bit risky, and sometimes the shingles will tear out prematurely, and it'll be ruined. That's one reason I cut my blocks a couple inches longer than necessary. That gives me a better chance of making it to 18 inches, even if the shingle does tear out. I don't throw out the pieces that didn't make it to the end though. These can be used on the roof. It's necessary to cut shingles when you get close to the cap anyway, so these short ones will be saved for that. After I've taken off the first 2 shingles, I'll take a couple from the opposite face of the bolt, always keeping as close as I can to the ray lines. So I got 2 shingles off of this side. Now I'll try to get 2 shingles off of this side. By about 1850, machine-made shingles were becoming widely available. These were generally sawn, a totally different process from the old hand-split shingles. Within 10 or 20 years of the first sawn shingles becoming available, people were already beginning to realize that they were inferior to the old hand-split variety. But this had almost no effect on the dominance of sawn shingles by the end of the 19th century. Today, there are very few people that split traditional shingles for a living. After these first 4 shingles, I'm usually left with a wedge. If I can get a 3-inch shingle from it, I can clean it up. If not, it'll be saved for something later on. I'm generally left with a triangle like this. And I look at both sides. This side's significantly thicker. I think I can get one more shingle right here. We're going to try. We're following the ray lines as closely as possible. Not bad, but I'm going to try to square this up a little bit here. Try to take off a little waste. I tried to take as much material off as possible with the Pro. This will save me a lot of time shaving later. That'll make a nice shingle. Sometimes I can get one more shingle out of a sliver like this, but they need to be at least 3 inches wide, and this one just won't make it. Of course, these are not finished shingles and still require a bit of work to make them good for a roof. Now it's time to take off the sapwood. The sapwood needs to go. It's prone to decay and every bit of it needs to be taken off. A quick split with a hatchet or a froe removes most of it. and a bit of quick trimming will square it up nicely. I then square up the other edge, making a consistent width from end to end. Doing this takes off any of the sapwood that didn't come off with the fro. I then put the shingle in the shaving horse and commence to bring it to a smooth finish. Rough shingles are more prone to decay than a smooth shingle. These little ridges would provide a convenient place for moss and bacteria to grow. And I'm going to tell you right now, moss may give your historic roof a quaint appearance, but ultimately, it is going to destroy your roof. I can almost guarantee it. So go with smooth shingles. The word shingle comes from the Latin word shingula, which means roofing tile or shingle. When I shave the shingles, I make sure to keep a taper. This is absolutely necessary for putting on the roof. Well, it really doesn't pay that much. It takes about 3 good days to complete a square of shingles. Most of my shingles go onto my own projects, but I will sell them on occasion. If someone is actually interested in purchasing the shingles, I'll generally sell them for about $700 a square. If the shingles are going on one of my own projects, however, the price naturally comes down considerably. When I calculate the cost of the raw materials and the time involved, I'm generally walking away with between $15 and $20 an hour. If it was any less than that, I just could not justify the time. For a hand-finished shingle that should last at least 50 years on a roof, $700 should be a reasonable price. However, these shingles are only available for use on structures that were built prior to 1880. For an extra fee, I'm always happy to deliver the shingles myself, and if necessary, be on hand for installation to offer technical support. That's just my sneaky way of getting out of town once in a while. Now, when it comes to tools, you really don't need much. You need a hammer and 2 or 3 wedges. I generally keep 3 close at hand, one of them with a pretty good point on it to start a crack. The other 2 are there just to expand a crack. Then, of course, you need a fro. A fro is nothing more than a strip of steel with a dull blade on one edge and a handle coming up out of one end. You can manipulate the handle to kind of control the split when you're going through a piece of wood. You also need a hatchet or a small axe, preferably with a single bevel, just to kind of square up the edges. For finishing the shingles, I use a draw knife and a shaving horse. The shaving horse I build myself. I put an extra thick seat on it because this shaving horse also serves as a cutting board. This is where I set the raw shingle down and trim it and do whatever else I need. Then, when I'm ready to shave it down, I just put it in, clamp it into place. I then shave it down with a draw knife. When you're moving thousands of shingles around at a time, a shingle press is incredibly useful. I learned very early that when you're dealing with a niche product like hand split shingles, you must always be prepared to make your own tools and equipment. So, based on a vague drawing I saw in an 1870s newspaper, I made myself a shingle press. I need a little more practice to get it just right, but we will get there. This will save me a lot of trouble in the future. I've seen too many historic buildings totally wrecked by these western red cedar shakes. You know, I used to have my doubts about white oak as a roofing material. I mean, it just doesn't have the same reputation as cedar. But after a few years of observation and study, I came to the conclusion that the cedar roofs going on today aren't really that good. They rot just as fast as anything, and they become soft and brittle after just 10 or 20 years at the most. In studying the old documents about shingle making, I found it asserted that a good roof will wear out long before it rots. If a roof is properly installed with a good slope and without too much shade, it'll stay pretty dry. A couple of years ago, I read about a roof in Virginia that was about 130 years old. The shingles were white oak. That helped make me feel a little better about using white oak, But something else totally convinced me. I was doing something out in the woods and kicking around in the weeds and found a rejected shingle I had tossed aside about 10 years ago. Except for the obvious weathering, it was in almost perfect condition. No signs of rot at all, and incredibly tough. If you remember that Coopers use white oak for barrels, and it was used in ship making, you start to understand that it is definitely an underrated material. But a lot of that comes down to the methods of production. A sawn shingle is cut. This, I believe, opens up the pores of the wood, allowing the shingle to soak in a lot of moisture. When it's split and shaved, the pores are kind of kept closed. By about 1860 or so, it was starting to be understood that sawn shingles were not lasting nearly as long as the old split shingles. Split shingles are also very stable. They generally won't warp or cup, and they won't shrink or expand very much at all. And finally, white oak is easy for me to find. I do most of my shingle making in the winter, when it's too cold to lay stone, or there's too much snow to do anything else. I fire up the wood stove in my shop and enjoy a relaxing day of shingle making. I can sit at my shaving horse and pray, smoke, drink tea, cuss every once in a while, and just listen to the music of my tools doing their work. But it pays, and I need to do it, because quite frankly, making the best quality shingle for an affordable price is something I have to do myself.